Hey everyone, on today's episode of the Sales Factor podcast, we have Stephane Barnatt. He is a communications technology evangelist, I would call him. He's got about 15 years experience in sales and 8 of those years in leadership. Now, his mission is to help redefine what virtual events, video, um, online, digital revolution is bringing to the market and really unifying the communications and how we do it into a content creation stack. So he's currently working for Zoom, which I know you probably all know. And I'm super excited to have him on the show. He's a wealth of knowledge. So let's get into it. Stefan, what is the biggest challenge, the biggest problem in sales that you're finding right now?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, Aaron. I think anyone that's in the sales industry knows that there's always a number of challenges you got to overcome in order to go and hit your number and drive towards your business objectives. And there's
Mm,
quite a few now in right now. So we've got macro and economic environments creating difficulties in terms of winning deals. But I think
mm,
the area that I'm really focused on, the one that I'm having to adjust to, which again I'm sure is quite a common denominator for a lot of your listeners, is selling this new hybrid working environment. And there's a number of different aspects to that, but the one that I've found a lot of value, not just in my selling, but also my personal career, is learning how to get the most out of video meetings. I think it's a big change for us.
mm.
I'm so used to going to meet customers face to face, putting on a suit, going down and meeting your customer, developing relationships. And in a lot of ways, that's been lost moving across to this hybrid way of working and trying to, develop relationships over video. And it's a very different skill set.
Mm.
Um, and I think one of the biggest things that I've had to get my head around is that it's not the same as a meeting, right? It's a different format, and you have to adjust your tactics for that format as well. So
Yeah,
I think for me, that's the biggest thing I see, and it's something that I have to coach a lot of people on as well. It's not something that I think comes naturally to everybody.
yeah. You've taken me right back to my early sales days. So we were targeted every day or every week to get at least one meeting a day with a new business or a new client. And the preparation to find out who the client was, where they are, travel, going there, doing a long meeting with them was, I thought, was really beneficial. And you're absolutely right. Changing into more of a video led meetings is can be a change for a lot of people. But like, why do you feel that's such a big challenge in the sales market right now? Why do you think people are potentially not getting the most out of meetings?
Well, I think because video like conferencing has become such a commodity, it's broken
Mm,
down a lot of barriers in terms of getting meetings. So the first thing I see is meetings are always, you go to meet someone face to face, they're always an hour, right? You always would schedule in an hour. And now you go
yeah.
to video meetings. And because the cost of the video meeting is so much less, and what I mean by that is you're not traveling, you're not even having to go from one meeting room to another meeting room. You're just sitting at your desk. So people fill their calendars with back to back presentations. And that in itself creates a lot of issues, I think, in the fact that, well, one, you may have a great call for half an hour and then you're not really able to delve into the conversation enough that you may want to. So you're not even giving yourself the leniency to provide that. Two, meetings actually tend to overrun. I think people become a lot more
Mm,
sloppy and turn up on time because I think people have become very comfortable with this more flexible way of working. We say, oh, sorry, I had to go take the washing out, I have to do something like that, which is, I think it's great. And for my internal meetings, it's absolutely fantastic. But when you're meeting a customer for the first time, I think we've let that professionalism slip sometimes.
yeah.
And then finally, to your point, there's a lot of work you have to do pre-meeting and post-meeting. And if you're stacking
Mm,
up these meetings back to back, it's great. You're meeting so many customers, but are you really able to delve the value of that? Are you remembering everything from every meeting post call? And there's obviously, there's tools coming out. So here at Zoom, we just released Zoom IQ, which does a thing which gives you your meeting notes, will tell you how well you performed in that meeting, leveraging AI and stuff like that. But I still think that if you're not planning the meeting times, you're not giving yourself that space, that breathing room between meetings. Are you going into every meeting with your focus, with your attention?
mm,
um, Knowing what you want to achieve, achieving that, then writing your notes down and really taking yourself through the steps. And I think in some ways, maybe we're on a learning curve and we're going to get used to this new way of meetings. But I think in a lot of ways, it's actually that we've gone away from standard agendas and the basic management of what we would want to get out of a meeting, and just adjusted that to a video meeting. I think what we've tried to do is say, looked at all the benefits that video meetings give you, which is straight, easy access, and leverage them to the max without thinking, as with all technology, when you release new technology, there are so many benefits, but with those benefits come some unknown downsides that you have to learn how to manage and work around.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. When I was in tech sales, not so much now, but when I was in tech sales, I had back-to-backs, half-an-hour meetings. And what I found, and let me know if you find this as well, is every meeting almost becomes the same script, and it's not necessarily personalized specifically to that client, because I hadn't had much time to prep or really dive into who that business is and what they're all about to really come to that meeting with, and wow them per se, or at least build that relationship. It almost becomes like the same old, same old. I know exactly what I'm saying. I know the script, etc. But you mentioned earlier you trained a lot of people on meetings and how to effectively get the most out of them. And absolutely, I think longer meetings, and people have turned up late to my meetings as well, and it can get a bit frustrating as well. But what have you found that really works then for if people do have back-to-back meetings? Like what really works to make the meeting more effective? What should people really focus on to make sure they're getting the most out of those video meetings with the prospects?
So I think first and foremost, I come back to just managing your calendar. I think that's it. So what's the saying that the scouts say? It's always about preparation. And I think that's the key thing. So preparation. So again, I would just really focus on 45 minutes minimum. And even if you're only going to talk for half an hour, just have that additional 15 minutes, because you say people turn up late, it can be frustrating. But also if someone turns up 5 minutes late and it's your first time meeting them, you want to know who's in the room, right? And again, one of the great things about a virtual meeting is someone can just bring someone in easily. It's not the same as like having to bring someone across from a different part of the office or coming from a different office entirely. This is something you can just send a link and they can come into that meeting. And you want that as a salesperson. You want the engagement from the customer. But that also means that's an additional level of introductions. That's somebody else you've got to build a rapport with. And if you've only got about half an hour, and let's say this is your first time meeting them, you don't want to get stuck in this introduction. This is who we are. This is why we're meeting. And you've never actually got around to asking questions and understanding what the customer wants to learn from you and what you want to impress upon the customer based on what they've told you. And so I would just say, first of all, that's the biggest thing to me. I would actually always stretch for an hour and then give yourself 15 minutes after that call to decompress, to re-energize yourself for the next call. I remember when I worked in a company previously where we basically sold data solutions. So it was quite a dull sale, but the conversation would be quite in depth and quite technical. And there was a colleague I worked with, and we always thought it was very strange, but it's a practice that I've actually adapted myself. He would come into the office and he would not call, he would not do any meetings before 9:30. And he would spend the first 30 minutes just getting himself in the right headspace. And he would almost go into almost like a Zen-like state where he's building up his confidence, he's building up his emotions. So he knows he can give the best version of himself in that call, which is something I think we all preach, but actually doing it is a little bit more difficult. But it gets especially hard to do it if you're not creating that agenda. You're managing your calendar effectively to ensure that you've got those breaks in between meetings. And I would just put it like another way is that I always say to people that sales is like a roller coaster ride. The reason you work in sales is you want to enjoy the highs, you're going to have some lows. It's great when you win a sale. It's awful when you get a rejection. And this job is mainly about rejections. So just think about, like, let's say you've had a closing meeting with a customer and it's not gone your way. You don't want to take that and go right like that straight into a new business presentation where you start to present to a customer. Where maybe you've had some objections you can't get over, and suddenly now they're playing on your mind. You're trying to introduce yourself to that customer. It's hard to have that separation. So that's the first point. And I think particularly with younger salespeople or in businesses that are overly KPI driven, it's a difficult conversation to have because everyone thinks, well, the more meetings I'm doing, the more activity I'm doing, the better I'm going to do. And I think we all know that, yes, activity is key. Hitting your KPIs is really important. But it's about how you do it as well. It's not just about doing it for the sake of doing it. I mean, I've heard of other businesses where, because they've got hybrid work and they've put these KPIs, and some people spend more time trying to hit their KPIs than actually hitting their target. So I think it's important to always remember why you're doing these things and to bring that back into the fact that it's quality over quantity.
Yeah.
And that's what I would say first and foremost is the first step I would coach people on with video meetings, because it's not an easy thing to get your head around, to say, because people will make you think more is better, and that's not the case, I think, on that front. I think the second one, and I'm hoping I'm doing a good example of it here right now, because it's something I've struggled with in the past, because I've been in the video space for a while. I ran a studio for a while in central London, so I was very used to doing mock presentations for customers with 3-4 cameras on me. So I became ultra relaxed. So when I was going through a couple of recruitment processes for myself, I got the feedback you were just too relaxed. You weren't giving us the right kind of energy or the right kind of vibes over video. And that's something, again, I take in the heart. And I think that when I'm talking to people, I want to make sure that the passion that you can show face to face, you need to demonstrate the ability to bring that over video. Because again, that's something that's not natural for you. I used to run a training program for speakers for doing virtual events and presentations. And you would get some of the world's best public speakers that just couldn't do it on camera. They had, like, you call it red light syndrome, where the red light comes on and it's almost like they fall to pieces. It's a different type of presentation skill. And part of that is the fact that, we're talking today right now, and I can't really see the whites of your eyes. I can see you're here. I can see you're paying attention, but it's a different experience. Whereas if I'm presenting to 200 people in a room, the way I've been taught to public speaking is, checking on the audience, look at someone, focus on someone, deliver that message to that person, make it personal, draw them in. It's a lot harder to do that on video. And I think it's the same for when you start doing a sales presentation, whether you're meeting a single person or multiple people. Actually understand how to build rapport through a lens is a different experience than when you're doing it face to face. Particularly where, video meetings have come a long, long way, but there still is this thing where every now and then internet can be a bit funky and you can start talking over each other and you almost kind of get lost in your points. So being comfortable with that and understanding the technology, these are all things that take time, but learning how to leverage the technology to build that rapport is key. So, one of the things that we try and do is make sure you're center of the camera, just a very basic thing. Because if I go across like that, or if I go across like that, suddenly it feels like I'm not looking at you when I'm speaking. And that can feel a big difference in terms of what the engagement is for having a meeting with someone. And, right now I've got 3 screens, right? So another big thing is most people, they love having their 3 screens open. But when you're doing a meeting, that person's come to meet you and they want your time. So you need to give them your time as well. And that means shutting other things down, which again, email pops up, notifications, your Slack channel, whatever it would be, your Zoom chat, whatever it be you're going on with in the business. They're all things you have to deal with. Whereas again, when you're in a face-to-face meeting, everyone knows to put their phone on silent. Everyone knows to do those things. I think that we're still going through this learning curve with video meetings where people have to understand they have to do that. And I think because of this hybrid work where a lot more of us are working from home, there's been a little bit of a slip of professionalism, and maybe that's some of the things that we sort of have to reinforce into our team now. And that's not something that's just for junior people. That I would say that's going across the board.
Yeah, but like loads to unpack there, and thanks for that, because like you're absolutely right. Just taking the time to digest after a meeting, and it ties in with the energy piece, because if you're going in from meeting to meeting, and say you've had a meeting that didn't go well, you're in a mindset or a mind frame going into the next meeting, you're carrying that across, where that 5, 10, 15 minutes, take a break, go for a walk, re-energize yourself, come back in, and it can make all the difference. And the other bit that you talked about there was about the energy, and I get it from both sides, because I've done coaching on Zoom to 100 people that are just in chat and they're not on camera, so I'm the only one on camera and I'm presenting, so I have to get the energy up, I have to get the interaction. And one of the main things I said, sorry, I know you're all salespeople, turn off your emails, please, put your phone on silent, give me your attention for about 40 minutes, because if you listen to what I'm saying, it's going to help you push forward and get more results. And I think distraction's a massive thing on video. So I at my desk now, I've got, a few things around. My phones are turned off over to the side, but I've been on Zoom meetings or pitches with people, and you can just see them, they're on their phone. Whereas like what you said, in a face-to-face meeting, like it's totally different. And I think you can pick up more vibe, more energy face-to-face. Like
I think you're true there, but the thing that you said there that I think really resonated with me, you talked about that when you did that presentation, 100 salespeople, you set what the rules were for them. Say, I know
Mm,
what you like, do that out. And I think you need to do that as a salesperson as well. Like you need to remember that your time is also valuable. And I think that's the thing that as salespeople, we always want to please the customer. We want to win the customer over. Sometimes that actually means you've got to set the rules and the expectations that you're bringing to that presentation as well. It's the old school, I'm going to give you something, you need to give me in return. So you need to remember that
yeah,
you're giving them your time as well as they're giving you their time. So
yeah,
in order to make this as rewarding as possible, you need to kind of set those ground rules as well. And that can be a difficult conversation to have, to turn around and say, I do it a number of times, say, can people turn their cameras on, for example? Now, if
mm,
someone can't for any reason, that's fine. But having the confidence to say, "Oh, hi there, you guys going to turn your cameras on," is a completely acceptable question to ask in this day and age. And I think we need to remember that. And there'll be reasons why people can't, and that's
sure.
completely fine.
Mm,
But just showing that by asking that question, you're giving them the input that you have an intent to get their attention, and that's
mm,
super important. And I mean, I've done face-to-face presentations, and I always say that maybe it's not the first time you go and meet someone, but definitely when you go in and you're meeting a CTO or the main buyer, there's a C-suite executive that's been brought to that meeting kind of against what they want to do, but they know they've got to come into that room. When you're doing that face-to-face, you're presented to everyone, but all you're really focusing on is you want to get that person's attention for like 5 minutes, because if you get their attention, like one, you can reflect on what's the point that got their attention. You can then focus your
mm,
conversation around that moving forward, because as important as everyone else is in the room, the one that's buying or the one that you need to sign off on your deal is the most important person in terms of winning them over. And you can leverage all the relationships with everyone else, but you want to make sure that they're not being dragged to that decision. You want to feel like they're actually
yeah,
engaged and interested in coming on that journey with you. And it's important, again, we talk about how you sort of are prepared for these meetings, knowing who's going to be in the meeting, knowing who the person is on that video call that you need to impress upon. Again,
mm,
these are, I think, skills that we all had when we did physical meetings, but when it moved to virtual, again, it's harder to maintain that when you've got meeting to meeting to meeting, because you can't always concentrate on who the right people are. So then when you have that skill set, you know who people are. That also means that when you're doing a presentation, and let's say you're doing something around an RFP and there's a particular point you want to hone in, you can go to that person and say, person X, what did you think of that? Is there any concerns about that?
mm,
And I think what tends to happen in meetings is video meetings, because there's less of a natural flow of conversation, that natural energy that comes from face-to-face communications. And there's a couple of reasons why that is. I mean, the fact is we're all using more brain power presenting over video because of the delay, and our brains are having to sort of adjust to that.
mm,
But also the fact you can't really have that physical connection, you can't see everyone that's engaged, you don't know who to impress upon at any given time. It's important to then point out to the audience and not just go, any questions? Because if you've got introverts in that room, and you're going to have introverts in the room, they're not going to put their hand up. Whereas if you say to someone, you mentioned this would be really important to you, does this solve your problems? Being very direct to that individual, you're going to get more engagement. You're actually going to get more honesty. And again, a
mm,
very important thing about sales I talked about, it's about quality over quantity.
mm.
So if someone's not interested, I'd rather know in that meeting than have a meeting, engage in an email back and forth, and then suddenly realize, oh, they're really not that engaged.
Yeah,
So I think it's important to qualify that within that, to give you that almost gut instinct that you get when you do a face-to-face meeting. Well, that went really well. And what the biggest thing that I noticed difference from doing face-to-face to virtual is if you had a good meeting, it would always overrun. Those meetings would always overrun, and you had the ability to do that because you're going to somebody's office, they would come to you, you'd sacrifice that time. In video meetings, you need to find a new way to gauge a good meeting, because it's very rarely that video meetings will overrun in the same way that a physical meeting does.
yeah. It's almost like people are clock watching. Oh, I'm 3 minutes to the right. I gotta go. Like, and you might have more things to uncover with them. And I really liked your point there about, if there is someone in the room, like how you have to get them engaged, even if they are like super busy and they've got stuff on. It's like, how do you direct questions to them? Asking any questions, of course, people are gonna gravitate to no questions. But being direct, do you feel that then when starting a virtual meeting? Because I'm face to face and virtual meetings, I would always start face to face, like with an agenda, or if like this is the reason we're all here. Is everyone on the same page? Are you? And then anyone that's not, then you can include them in. But how do you find then starting virtual meetings? Do you do something similar with like set the expectation rules, agenda? What have you found works really well?
Yeah, I think that stuff works really well. I think I'd take it a step before that though. Is the fact that you want to leverage things like waiting rooms. So if you're the one organizing the meeting,
Right.
and again, I would always stress, if you're the salesperson, you be the one that sends out the invite. It's always better that the invite comes from you as opposed to coming from them, because once you do that, you actually have no control over the room, and it's really important that you have control over the room, because that means that from a technical side, you're the one presenting, right? That they're just watching or be joining you in the call. So you want to make sure that you've got control over that experience. So if you want to do screen share, if you want to jump into anything, you know it's going to work because you can prep for that stuff, that type of thing. And then you want to leverage things like waiting rooms. So again, we talk about the fact that people just drip into a meeting. So again, you would get that in physical rooms, but it's very natural to have a conversation, right, where you're speaking to someone and then you see someone approaching and everyone's aware of that person's approach at the same time. In a meeting, if someone's in the waiting room, only you, the host, knows that. And so you're having a conversation with someone and you're trying, right, should I let them in now? Or do I, wait till I finish this point? You're the only one that's aware of it. So I would say there's two things to that. One, I would wait till the bulk of your attendees are actually in the room before starting it. Don't start it dead on the time. So we have a great thing here at Zoom where we have like a holding video that you can put up. So you can actually have your pre-pitch content there. And one of the things with exploring one of our partners actually can we personalize those videos to these individual meetings so that we can talk about their message as well as ours. So the people that are waiting for you to join, they've got a message letting you know that you're aware they're there. You're just setting the meeting room up or something like that. But then you want to wait for the bulk of them to come in, because what really can stagnate a call is you start it, one person's in, and then you're like, all right, we're gonna wait for these people. You start doing your soft skills, right? We start to get to network and things. Invariably, because I'm British, I start talking about the weather, or it's been the Ashes recently, or it'll probably be the football soon. But then someone else will come in, and then they're coming to this completely meeting cold. But it's not that they're coming to cold; they're very much interrupting the flow of you both. Whereas when you do it physically, like people can find their seat, you can shake hands, you can do things, but you can keep that conversation going. It's very hard to do that over video. So by bringing that in, you're kind of not going to keep on interrupting that, and you can sort of start off the general conversation. And then once everyone's ready to get started, you go through exactly the same thing. This is why we're meeting today. Is everyone on board? This is what we wanted to cover. Doing the time check is very important. But again, I think the big part is like hour meetings, not half an hour meetings. I think that's a trend that needs to change. Maybe if it's a half an hour, like this is just an introduction and it's one person, that's fine. But when you're meeting multiple people, it has to be an hour.
Yeah.
And then, I think you jump into your presentation that you would typically do. I think the most important thing is that you're not doing a show and tell, because it's dull to be stuck in a room when someone just puts up a slide deck, right? And you're sat there watching a slide deck going, okay. And particularly if, typically I'm there with my sales, I'll be there with a sales rep of mine, and you might have seen that pitch 100 times, right? But remember, the customer has seen the pitch deck of every company under the sun coming in. So I would definitely try and focus on telling a story and not relying on screen share as much as possible. And then bringing it back to doing the things that you can do really well on a video call that you can't necessarily do face to face. So one of the things that video calls are really good for are doing technical demonstrations, because again, you have complete control. You know your laptop's going to work. You'll know you're pushing it out. You have complete control over that. Now, where it doesn't work is that you can't then give the control to somebody else. So if you've got a particularly touchy-feely customer that likes to get their hands on something, then you don't have that available to you. So it's worth bearing that in mind. But I think for me, again, out the agenda, make sure people are comfortable, let people know if they're going to be leaving, and then get round the introductions. And I think the biggest thing that I would say, and this is the thing that I actually probably did really bad, so I need to improve on it, is if you've got a team of your going in, actually talk about who's going to introduce each other first. Because again, the thing with video calls is you're all seeing everyone's squares in different, it's not like it's all managed the same. So everyone's going to see it in different orders. So unless you actually have a list of who you want to introduce time by time, it can look really unprofessional on your side to go, well, I guess I'll go now. So I'm so and so, and this is it. So actually understand who you want to introduce when and how, and then run through those introductions. And then again, I would even recommend in advance of the call, if your customer's bringing a big group, just ask the person that's hosting the meeting, look, can you set up a structure of who wants to introduce who first, so we can run through that as well? Because again, it just gives it a better flow than, well, I guess I'll go. And then because it just sucks up room, and that will just then get you onto a good fit and everyone's engaged. And that's the main part. We have a couple of other things at Zoom that's quite useful in terms of, we've got this app called Warmly, which can then show things like people's LinkedIn profiles. So if you're not the main presenter on a video call, I always think it's very useful, if you're not presenting, to then just do a little bit of research during the meeting, before the meeting. If you have not been able to do it, you can do it during the meeting. Just go into these people and actually see if there's anything common thread that you can pick out, or any points you can have a conversation around.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you mentioned a few things there around Warmly. I've used Warmly. I think it was great. Because if someone's presenting and you don't know that person, you've just been invited to this meeting. It's a nice way, rather than you stepping in, interrupting the flow, and then not being able to ask questions. You can just click on it and it'll bring them to it. But yeah, I think you mentioned earlier about telling stories, and I think it is a massive point that if you look at any human, we are designed to follow stories, right? If I come in with loads of facts and figures and stuff like that, or a presentation, this is the data, this is what we do, like all that stuff's great and it's relevant and you need it. But if you've got a story to tell people, people will follow stories. Like, think of like going the weekend or a couple of weeks ago with your friends or your family or people that you speak to. Like, what are you going to talk about? Oh, remember 2 years ago you did this. Remember the stag do we went to in Barcelona? And people remember stories more than they do just facts and figures. So I really think if anyone's listening to this, telling stories where people can connect to, relate to, that can demonstrate, backed up with the facts and figures of what your product or service do. I think that you're going to get much more of a buy-in. And then with an essence of like being direct with questions, if you notice someone in the room that's not engaging, like in the back of your mind, you got to, I guess, be thinking, okay, how do I get this person interacting with me so that they feel a part of it as well as you? And before I move on to the next question, you'd mentioned there about I guess when you are directing those questions to people, I feel that potentially people are afraid. They're afraid, like, to see the CTO or CFO or the buyer, and they're maybe a bit afraid to ask that direct question, or they might feel a bit too forceful, or they might, So if that's the case, if people are listening to this now, like, what advice would you give to salespeople if they know they need to do it, but they have that hold back from them actually, asking that direct question?
So I bring it back to, they've chosen to come to this meeting to hear from you. I think a lot of salespeople, because you're, to your point, you're so used to doing the same pitch or running through the same presentation over and over again, that you assume that all the customers you talk to have the same level of knowledge about the market that you do. The point that they have sacrificed time at their calendar. So, for example, you said a CTO's calendar is ram-packed full. So if they've taken the time out to come to this meeting, whether by their choice or they've been asked to by somebody else, remember that you are the person that should have the position of strength. They're here to hear from you. And if you've got a direct question to ask them to understand about where you want to go, I think it's important that you do that, because otherwise you're only ever going to scratch the surface. And that's going to mean that you're not going to stand out to the other suppliers that are at the table. Because if you're just doing your pitch and you're talking to me about what you are, and you're never really understanding or relaying how it relates to the customer, then all you're doing is telling a story. And telling a story is great, but then you need to relate that story to who the individual is. And then at that point, you can move to providing demonstrable proof that you're going to make solve a problem or provide them a route to a business goal, whatever that is. And the person that will know the business objectives more than anybody else is that C-suite person. So
yeah,
the thing that happens all the time, every meeting, is that you'll have that first meeting with let's say it's someone lower down the chain, and you think you have a great idea of what they actually want to achieve. When you have that second meeting, the most important thing is actually, when you've got those more senior people, is say, right, this is what we've discussed so far. Are we on the right track? Because so many salespeople assume that, well, we've been told that this is the problem, this is what we're going to solve, and these are the motives for that. But that may be the motive for the individual you're speaking to. And I think it's always important to remember that when you're making a sale, that you're appealing to, well, you know, one, what their business objective is, but two, what that individual's career objective is. Like if someone, you're asking someone to buy a solution or a product off of you, that's going to reflect on them, and that is going to give them some kudos within their organization. So you want to make sure that they're on the same path as everyone else within the business, because having worked in a lot of organizations, sold to a lot of organizations, particularly larger ones, people always do things for different reasons, and actually understanding what those reasons are is really, and this is all basic stuff that people do in their med pick and everything like that. But actually using your, you know, the way you fill out that med pick is you ask the questions during the meeting. You don't forego that opportunity, because it's going to be very difficult if you didn't connect to get that CTO, that C-suite person back on another call.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got that one shot. And I think if you're not, like, what's the worst that can happen if you redirect the question to them? But keep in mind, like what's in it for them, because they might have a higher level view of the vision of the business and stuff like that. So relating it back to them, I think if you don't take that shot, you don't know if you're going to get it again.
Yeah, I mean, like, at the end of the day, what you're doing with a sale is you're asking a company to make a change. So what does that mean? You're actually going to them and saying, you don't do things as good as you could be doing them. I've got a way that you could be doing this better. So when you break that down, like if you went to your friend, we're talking about friends, a good friend will come and tell you that you're not doing something right and you need to improve. A bad friend won't say that to you. They'll just be, okay, that's fine. It's up to them. They can manage it themselves. I'll say what I think works, but it's up to them to make that decision. But a good friend will always recognize, you know, that you're doing something wrong. And I think that's the same thing for a good relationship between a customer and a provider, one of honesty, and one where you can trust each other and you're talking about these things. And the only way you develop trust and honesty is you're direct with each other in terms of your question. And this is something that I think is, I think for people from the UK, they find very difficult. I think we have a very good way of going around the houses in terms of talking to our friends and family members. So we're not great at being direct. You know, there's loads of jokes of how, you know, how's your day going? Oh, I'm okay. I'm doing all right. You know, it's like a non-response to that question. Whereas if you have that conversation with people from other cultures, they'll give you some very varied answers. But you're like, wow, okay, it can be a bit full on for you as a Brit to take. So I think we need to bring that in mind when we talk about sales as well, is the fact that we, you know, ask these questions. It's about demonstrating, one, you're the expert, two, that you care, and three, that you're trying to develop a real relationship with that person. It's not one that's at arm's reach. It's one where you're really listening to each other and trying to solve a problem. And I guarantee if you do that, maybe you don't get the sale that time, but you've definitely earned yourself the opportunity to meet with that person later down the line, because you've really taken the time to understand what their real problems are. What you've not done is gone, I've heard X, Y, and Z. I hear X, Y, and Z all the time, so I'm going to present my solution for X, Y, and Z without relating it to that customer.
Yeah, they don't feel included then. They feel it's just like, oh, like I said earlier, it's just another pitch. I've been on multiple pitches before, and you're just being talked at. No, I love that. And another thing that was coming to mind, because obviously we're talking about video and stuff like that. And I think video is here to stay. I think video meetings are going to be here. They're here for the future. But with the market slightly changing to be more of a hybrid rather than fully remote, people are, you know, returning to the office, but not fully. Do you find that your sales team or people that you work with want to still do face-to-face meetings, or are you in the mindset of, like, you know, video meetings are kind of here to stay and this is the way forward now?
Well, I think video is definitely here to stay. I mean, video was growing massively before the pandemic. I think the biggest change that happened during the pandemic was everyone would join a video meeting, but people just wouldn't have their video cameras on. So now actually more people have their video cameras on than they had previously, which I think is a change for the positive. I think it's something that, you know, I think we need to make sure that trend doesn't go back in the other direction for all the reasons I mentioned about building rapport and stuff like that, and learning how to build that presence. And I think it's always about, again, knowing when to use the technology at the right times. And this is, you know, this is something I do about, like, so I sell virtual events, and a virtual event makes sense most of the time, but there are times where it won't make sense. And I think the same comes for a meeting or a presentation. There are certain presentations that I would prefer to do them face to face. And maybe I shouldn't say that someone that works for Zoom, our business is built on the fact we do video conferencing. But there's a reality to building relationships that doing things face to face sometimes makes a lot more sense. But the great thing about video, and actually turning everything on its head that I said about, the thing that's really frustrating about video meetings is the fact that it's almost reduced the cost of having a meeting. And that means everyone stacks them up. Actually, the benefit is that you can have a meeting at very low cost. So what I mean by that is, before the pandemic, you would give someone a trial of your license or something like that, and then you'd have to wait for that face-to-face or a phone call, whatever it is to have that. But now you can just jump on and do a whole training and get on board with them and start showing them how to use the tool a lot better and really build the rapport with the users a lot more. So there's a lot of benefit of how you can leverage video more than a sales process to integrate these different connection points that you didn't have the opportunity to have previously. But I do think, for example, if I was doing an RFP and then we're doing our big presentation, there's elements of that I would prefer to just do face to face, because again, I think that there's network building there that is really valuable. And I think there's always going to be, for big customers where you want to have a continuous rapport, I think you should be aiming to do some of your, whether you do a QBR with them or an annual review, make sure you do some of them at least face to face. So you're showing, because again, I think going to people's offices also shows that you care about them. I'm trying to, I'm also a big believer in one of the great things about video and hybrid working is the fact that it makes the world more sustainable and green. So I'm trying to also, the biggest impact is always going to be travel. So I think ultimately, if you want to do face-to-face, I would just try and say, make them face-to-face days or make them face-to-face a couple of days. So you're bringing all that, reducing the impact of that. But I think it's going to be a hybrid. I think video will be the main route. And I think this is why, to me, it's so important that people understand how to run successful video meetings, because I think too often than not, because we feel like we're getting all these more meetings than we were doing historically, that we're having a better presentation than we were. I kind of feel like I remember when everything was done over the phone and we do conference call, and you'd have problems with people jumping into the conference call, and then you'd almost lose 10 minutes at the beginning of the call. I feel like we've gone back to that, and we have to learn how to do these things a lot better. So we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with video meetings, I love them. I think it's great. It's a great way from a low cost perspective. You can meet multiple people in a day, which is great. But on the flip side, I really like face-to-face as well, for all the reasons that we said. But if you think of your top customers or top target clients you want to work with, if you're up against your competition going out to try and win their business, if you meet them face to face and your competition's not, I think the face to face stands out in their head. They remember you a lot more than just another video meeting. So I think it can be definitely a combination. Obviously, you're not going to go out after hundreds of your prospects and try and meet everyone, but be quite succinct and quite smart with it as to who you meet face to face, clump them together and go out. Good. Listen, loads of information there people can unpack and really look at their own meetings and what they're doing. The waiting rooms. I think that's a great idea.
The only thing I would add to that, just that you said there, that really made me think was, again, if you do I'm going to bring it back to calendar management. If you do sparse out your calendar a bit more than what you are, you're going to have the time and opportunity to actually just jump into those snappy video calls with your customers and move those sales along a lot more than if you're overcrowding your calendar. So your point is, if you decrease your calendar, you can do more face-to-face, but then you can get the more meaningful actions from video as well. Sorry to
No, great. It's great. I think it's definitely a combination for sure. I think there's loads of stuff in what you said people can unpack, look at their own video meetings, look at their diaries, look at what they're doing and see, are they actually getting the most out of it? So really appreciate you going through all that. It's really, really useful that people can take away. But you've been in sales for a long time. So what would you say is the biggest highlight of your sales career so far?
I feel like I'm getting interviewed for a job here. I think
maybe
there's multiple highlights, and I can talk. In terms of storytelling, one of the things that was really great for me to work on was during the Ebola crisis. I worked with Save the Children on actually training people to go over to Sierra Leone on how to use their PPE, which is a very different prospect to what the COVID PPE was. It was a much more intensive training course where we were connecting doctors from all over the world together to come and actually go and solve that crisis. But that was more of a project. I think in terms of a personal sales highlight, the one that I always come back to is one time in my career I was put on a performance plan, and that was like the middle of the year. And I took that really personally. I'd had a new manager come in. They completely changed the way about how I thought about forecasting, adjusted the way I did that, and I started working ridiculously long hours because I had the time. I was a younger guy then. And I went from being the worst performer in my team to the top performer and ending number one by the end of the year in a 4-month turnaround, leading the sale of a brand new product. And to me, that just showcased that it's a highlight for me because it was a personal achievement, but also it just reminds me that you get what you put into this. It's not something that you can ever coast on. I think more than ever, I'm sure you get this from your podcast, is that you might have one approach. You have to constantly reinvent yourself. And the greatest reward about working in sales is it's a constant drive for personal development to get better. And I think always remind yourself about how you improve is probably the biggest. That to me is a bigger sign of success than getting a big sale or a big win or being rewarded with a presence club or something like that. It's going back and reminding yourself how you've grown and how you can continue to grow if you put the work in.
Yeah, every day's a learning curve, right? We can look at multi-channel approach to get in front of prospects and stuff like that. And yeah, I'm the same. I think the performance plans are great because it highlights areas that you need to improve upon. And if we're looking at today's world, like if you're not self-developing on, emails, cold calling, whatever, there's umpteen amount of people on LinkedIn right now that give you free advice. And even today, I picked up an email sequence that I'm trying. I thought that was quite good, but I never came across before. So yeah, self-development is huge. And yeah, love that about you. I didn't know that about you, about the Ebola crisis and going out. But how did you get into that?
So I used to work with in one of my old companies. We used to work quite closely with a big telecommunications provider, and they were a partner of this organization. This opportunity came around.
Amazing.
And so it was an ongoing series. It went on for about 6 months, doing presentations for quite a while. And it was, that was a really rewarding experience. And actually, one of the great things being involved in virtual events over the past couple of years is the amount of different types of events you get to get involved in. So in terms of progression, social causes, helping organizations deliver good and bad news, it's very rewarding part of that. And, understanding what you're doing, which is helping businesses connect with their internal and external stakeholders. But it's always great when you get something that you feel has a real meaningful change, I would say.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I think it's great. I think, well, not great that the crisis happened, but that people like yourself are out there to, be there hand and foot, which is awesome. So just to wrap up the show, I really appreciate your time and everything that you've said today. But obviously, people can see you work for Zoom. But do you want to just plug in what specifically you do for Zoom, and feel free to shout out about how people should contact you, is it LinkedIn, or if you're hiring for people, and how people should contact you.
So Zoom is a lot more than meetings. Always important to reinforce that. So I run a specialization within an organization. So we have a phone product. We've recently launched a contact center and a bunch of AI solutions with tools like AQ and our room solutions. But we also have a webinar tool. So we're the largest webinar provider globally. And off the back of that, I joined Zoom to help launch our new events platform, which is a way to provide virtual and hybrid events, leveraging the Zoom meetings and webinar solution to connect internal and external stakeholders, free, paid for events. So my role has been supporting our AEs and working across to actually sell this solution out to the EMEA market space. I have a team working underneath me that is spread around the region to help do that. Right now, my team isn't hiring, but Zoom itself is on a hiring drive across a variety of different roles that we provide. And I think that's on our careers page. And also LinkedIn's a very good place to go to. And if you're looking to apply, I'd always recommend reaching out to any mutual connections you have, because the best way to get in is to go through someone you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Connections and referrals are always a great way. And if people want to reach out to you and just find out a bit more about, stuff that you're doing, I think the AI stuff that you guys are doing, like you mentioned, I thought that was great. Like if people want to find out a bit more about that and reach out to you, is LinkedIn the best way to contact you?
Yeah, LinkedIn's definitely the best way. I'll be sharing. I do a lot of webinars, so I'll be doing one with one of our partner companies, WorkVivo, later on this month, where we're talking about delivering employee experience, so delivering ongoing employee engagement through a website, or creating a type of space for people to go to on their phone. And then I'll also be doing about the biggest mistakes people make when they do virtual meetings and stuff like that. So it's a good place to come, not just connect with, but also see other presentations like this in the future.
Awesome. Legend. Stefan, really appreciate your time today. And that is us for today. So thank you.
No worries. Really great to have the call, Aaron, and look forward to seeing this and all your future conversations as well.
Cheers, buddy. Speak soon. Bye now. Wow, what an episode there with Stefan. That was loads of knowledge, and you can see his passion really driving through for video and online and doing meetings online, but doing it the right way. Okay. I think we can all fall into the trap of meeting after meeting after meeting. I've been there, and you're not really that prepared for every meeting unless you're just doing the same pitch over and over and over again. So, he's given loads of advice there around, give it an hour or at least give yourself a break 15 minutes before the next meeting. If you're not doing it, definitely advise, use your calendar wisely. Talked about utilizing the waiting room and something I never even thought about. Because how many times has someone just came into the meeting and you're like, it ruins your flow. So, yeah, taking that on board, I think that's a really good tip. He also talked about knowing who's in the room, preparation, agendas. We know all that. But then how do you direct conversation to people who ultimately are the ones that are going to buy your product or service? And not being afraid of it, not losing that opportunity to really drive the message home and get them involved, get them interacted so the meeting goes well. So, loads to take away and implement and think about your own daily life and your own calendar of meetings that you do. Implement it if you need to, and that will be us for now. So, I will see you all on the next one.